Hey podcast, today we are sitting with Neak and Ashley Hicks from JBG Smith. We talk a little bit about their backstories, then get right into their vision for JBG Smith's parking assets in the DC area. Next, we talk about Neak's first mission to automate 64 lanes of equipment for 8 million square feet of office and 15,000 spaces in Crystal City. Then Ashley gives us an education on EV charging stations. Finally, we discuss everything they are doing to set standards of excellence in their parking facilities and the unique challenges they face as an owner, operator, and developer of real estate. Hope you enjoy. So I'm Lester Mascon, and this is Parker X. And today we're sitting with
Neak, also known as Neak, with JBG Smith.
And Ashley Hicks with JBG Smith.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So I think I usually just jump right into these things instead of having a bunch of stuff in between. So Neak, let's start with kind of your story. Like, how did you get started in parking, and what is your role today at JBG Smith?
I was tricked.
You're tricked.
Like most people. How everyone gets started into parking, it's you get tricked into it. I joined Colonial, quite a few years back now. It's been at least 7 years back. While I was with Colonial, I happened to come upon two gentlemen in the garage playing around with equipment. Went out there to confront them about why they were playing around with equipment. Turns out to be Patrick Terrell, who was the COO for Venado Charles E. Smith, and Paul Edenbaum. So they asked me a bunch of questions related to the equipment, and ultimately asked me to join Venado Charles E. Smith shortly thereafter. And from that point forward, it got a little crazy. We had a plan to automate what was then and is still currently called Crystal City, and what will be in the future National Landing. At the time, the equipment was right about 15 years old. They claim it looked like it was 25 years old. It was old CCOM equipment, and we had parking attendants at each.
Was it all CCOM out there?
All CCOM.
Wow.
All CCOM, copper lines, literally. It wasn't even like Cat 5, it was just two copper lines. I was reading data back and forth, and some of it was RJ45 terminated, but every night it would fail. Everything would just fail. And I'd come in, and all the exit gates would be broken and laid on the drive lanes, and there was 64 lanes there. So we would scramble every morning to get the gates back up. It was the same thing every day. But I was tasked with automating Crystal City and building out a control center. So we did that quite quickly, and we had to convert everyone over from the old CCOM equipment, which I actually had a proprietary
Did it have the dip card that they had still, or was it the one you had to insert into the...
No, they decided to make their own HID card at some point.
Oh.
And it only worked on their system. So we had to convert everyone over from these HID cards, too. So the first half we did was 5,000 people. And we had to train everyone how to use validation systems, like online validation systems. And
So back up for a second. Those 64 lanes of equipment, how many buildings and how many parking spaces? Or
So it was 8 million square feet of office usage, and about 14, it varies who you speak to, because some people count surface spaces, some people don't. It was 14 to 15,000 spaces.
Wow.
And we had to do it quite quickly, and I say I had to do it quite quickly at the time, and the conversion went over actually very smoothly. We had about 2 weeks to convert it over, half of it, and we had been working with Ski Data to kind of make it happen. But ultimately, we got it up and running, waited a little while, waited to see what the revenue uptick would be, and ultimately, we saw some payroll savings, quite a bit of payroll savings, and I wasn't keen about eliminating jobs or anything, so I kept stalling a little while to see where I can relocate everyone. But ultimately, once we started removing the human factor out of the transaction, our revenue went up quite a bit in percentage numbers that were in double digits that we just had never expected to see. We thought it was going to, we had a number in mind. It over doubled that.
Wow. So that financed a lot of
Yeah.
Like it's free to do a lot more stuff.
So our payback was intended to be about 4 years. It ended up being half a year. So we were.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it was exciting. It was half a year in the first phase, and it paid for the other phase also in that half a year. So phase two, we finished up. We took our time a little bit more on that one, but at the same time, we were automating as many garages as we could under the Venado Charles E. Smith brand. And then, quite a few years later, we decided to go through a merger. We spun off of Venado's parent company, Venado Realty, and merged with JBG, and we're now JBG Smith. Portfolio size is large, significantly larger, and still growing. So, as we kind of move through, we're trying to automate where we can and put the latest and greatest technology in place and try to see where we can make that customer experience a lot better.
So what does the portfolio look like today from a parking asset portfolio?
Jesus, it ranges. It goes up and down. Right now, we're looking at about 60,000 spaces overall, and just 219 properties between our wholly owned and our managed portfolios and our fund portfolio. So it's large.
Do all of those have a parking asset you have to manage, or?
Yeah, everything has parking.
Okay.
So whether it's gated, revenue controlled, or it's just surface lots, as a team, we oversee all of that. And we help them with the operations or any type of changeovers that need to be done. So
That's probably more properties than most operators in the area have to worry about.
Yeah, I think we might be larger than the majority of the operators, and and I don't want to say for sure, but I think we're close to what most of the municipalities are sitting at.
Okay.
So it's a daunting task. We're not a large team, so it's
Technology is important then.
technology is extremely important, and it helps really drive the transparency that we're looking for into the system, so that we can really predict and understand what the revenue stance is, and not just from a revenue parking revenue standpoint, but also what our lease obligations and how our leasing and building build-outs will be. So parking is extremely important to us in that sense, where we can kind of go out to tenants and really understand what their potential full need is and what the full need of a neighborhood is too.
Wow. So Ashley, tell us how. So when did you join? What stage in this did you join, and how did you? This is your first job in parking, right?
Yes, I didn't quite get tricked into it like Neak. I knew what I was signing up for. So I obviously don't have any parking background history until now. I joined JBG Smith about a little over a year ago, June of last year, and kind of just was submersed in the parking world.
What did you do before?
So I've done quite a various of things. Most recently before JBG Smith, I worked with Bazzuto as a leasing manager on the residential development side. But I did 7 internships in college, ranging from being an art curator to working with, like we talked about earlier, post-production parts for Red Cinema. I helped small businesses transition to online markets. I've worked with small businesses in regards to just local growth. So very much different than what I'm doing now.
Sure.
And but I think it's added a little bit of extra expertise that I can bring into the parking industry.
I think it's always good when we get people from kind of outside just to kind of challenge the status quo, because I think once you've been in something for long enough, I think you kind of just get stuck in your ways a little bit and go, this is how it's done. And
yeah, and I've definitely been witness to that a lot in the parking industry.
I'd imagine
it's a little stiff around the corners, but I think it's getting modernized with time, and technology is evolving, and there's a lot of big players that are trying to get into this industry. So
what's your role now?
I'm a project manager, so I handle pretty much all of our technological integrations, implementation, and it has pretty much expanded outside of that too. We're as a company very aesthetically driven, so garage is the first and last point our tenants and customers touch. So we want it to be inviting, bright. We're implementing garage music, so you're listening to music as you exit and enter your vehicle.
That's cool.
And then as technology progresses, we're really trying to implement that and determine if that really, if there is a payback analysis to it and customer service, obviously it contributes a lot. And
yeah, sure. I mean, it always sucks when you go into a garage and it looks like a dungeon and the lighting's from like the 1960s and it hasn't been pressure washed in 10 years and
grandma's basement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of garages in Europe though where they actually where they actually paint the parking spaces in a different color. And they paint all one floor and do the different color. I thought that looked really nice.
Yeah, it's like they used all the negative space and like kind of inversed it.
Yeah. That made a nice impression when I saw that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what are the plans. So you guys have one of the nicest command centers I've ever seen, especially for a non-operator. So the operators always tend to have things like that, but you've got a command center that would rival any of the operators' command centers at this point.
So that was built with the first phase of the Crystal City build out, and I'll be quite honest, I built it too small, so we want to go bigger and better.
Because with expanding too as a company,
yeah.
Adding on another 100 properties.
That'll do it.
Yeah.
It gets tight in there. It's true. There's a part of me that feels this guilt for cramming everyone into this tight space that I used to work out of myself. And when I left, I was like, oh, geez, I left the whole team back there, working out of the small space. But so I think overall we're looking to really kind of expand that and. There's a part of me that wants 2 command centers where we kind of regionalize the command centers. That'll make it operationally easier, centralizing systems a little more difficult. But ultimately, I think, I'm going to be leaning on Ashley quite a bit to kind of come up with a better design and what's much more aesthetically pleasing. Because in the parking world, it looks great, but in the real estate world, we could do better.
It's interesting. If you see some of the major operators in Europe, they actually consolidated their command centers by the technology they had at the actual physical locations.
That's really interesting.
So where they had like a whole bunch of ski data here and a bunch of Scheidenbachmann here, they actually they stuck it and it got down to like 2 different vendors and just 2 or 3 different vendors and just they consolidated by technology versus regional.
That's really interesting because it's something that I think overall I've considered quite a bit over time where we're looking at, if we go into a region, we want that region to have the same equipment so that there's a uniformity for the end user and they understand how to use that equipment. If they go from building to building or from street to building or county to building, they have a good understanding of the same equipment. So ultimately, there hasn't been a great command center software out there yet. So I think that's actually going to be that push to having dual command centers.
So it's about the command center. So how many properties are connected to it today?
Well, properties are hard, but we have about, I think, we've added, I'd say probably close to 120 lanes now feeding into it.
Wow.
That have active feeds for video and intercoms.
Yeah, I think it's 120 on the
Yeah, now that we've added a few more properties to the market this year from new development that are now going back to the parking service center.
You have an idea how many calls you're handling per day and all
that? EMV readers have really thrown us for a loop and our customers too. So getting used to leaving your card inserted for a few seconds versus pulling it right back out has been a difficulty. So our guys would say they're getting overwhelmed right now with intercom calls, but on average, I mean,
it used to be around a couple hundred. It used to be 200 to 300 calls a day. There's a lot of walk-in traffic, so we also handle customer service face-to-face out of the command center for all of our tenants in Crystal City. And for a little while, it became kind of a hangout spot for our tenants. It was the most bizarre hangout spot, and I don't know why anyone wants to hang out there, but they would come down and they'd spend time, and some of our tenants would bring down muffins and cookies and brownies and donuts and tell their friends to come down and all meet there. And
really?
I felt like it was an excuse for people to get away from the office, so I understood that because they were like, oh, we got to take care of some parking. And
well, in my experience too, if you have great customer service, people like to hang around,
That's true.
Start feeling like family.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the most common call that comes into the command center today besides the EMV?
Ashley would say the same thing, and it is literally
User error.
yeah, max stripe down and to the right.
Oh, really?
The usual credit card max stripe down and to the right.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it could be the same users every day, and they just don't
Well, it's like you put up signage and you put up, we've looked into maybe even doing like small 10-second video reels to give an informational visual, but it still doesn't help. People want to get in, they want to get out, and when they're used to one system running really fast and then we change it, it takes a little adjustment to getting
Sure.
everyone acclimated.
What always shocked me was we put NFC also in place with the EMV, and no one uses it.
Yeah, I don't think that Apple Pay, it's hard because not everyone, it wasn't a worldwide movement, I feel like. Some stores take it, some stores don't.
I think it was a worldwide movement, just not in the U.S.
Well, yeah. Maybe I should say not a United States initiative, but getting people used to thinking of NFC as like the whole payment, and knowing that the whole shift sooner or later in the next few years will be to a virtual wallet.
Contactless cards are coming now, so that'll change that transaction quite a bit as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think the next big delay is going to be people dropping their contactless card.
Yeah.
And then scrambling to find it.
Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest challenges you guys face today? I mean, it's a huge portfolio. You're essentially, I know you still employ operators, but you're essentially a small operator at this point.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Well, I think our initial challenge is scalability. It's, there is only two of us.
Okay.
And to do what we do in the company, but ultimately, centralizing command, understanding data as it comes in, pulling that data and the useful parts of the data. There's a lot of junk out there, and cleaning up the data points is, that's the next big step from my plate. I know Ashley's got a ton on her plate. That's a totally different pain point, but a lot of what she does overlaps with what the overall operation does. So it helps out quite a bit. So I think Ashley can speak better to what her pain points are.
I mean, we do run into a lot of different issues with pain points and growth potential. And it's coming from many different directives, right? So you have a development wing, you have a construction wing, you have a property management wing. It's everyone.
They always
asset
think about
management.
parking last, don't they?
And it is slowly changing the mindset of like, hey, when you're talking about developing a site, bring us in on day one instead of, we're ready to open the doors and here you go. So then we can tell you to not put in tandem spaces in your parking garage because they're hard to manage and requires more personnel on site.
Oh, by the way, there's a parking budget we have to meet for revenue.
Yeah, exactly. And
There's
it's
no
operationally efficient, and knowing just all the little pieces to the puzzle. I mean, gosh, right now we have like a new project that was supposed to be live the end of July, and we're now pushing to the end of August because of contracts with legals and getting credit card processing set up and, our network in place and having infrastructure that was supposedly ran during construction and development phasing that wasn't, and deploying all those individual contractors to come and kind of piece together and make it all work has been challenging. But overall, I mean, we manage it pretty well. We've definitely taken, I think, a heavy burden off of the operators. And as we integrate more technology, those responsibilities have been spread out to multiple different companies to deliver. And like I said, I think our biggest initiative right now as a company is to kind of get everyone on board with parking. And it's mainly, everyone's pain point as a consumer and from our perspective as a developer. And so how do we provide this amazing experience where people are looking to park in our garage, especially because we're regionally located? We want to have a standard. We want people to recognize, hey, we know that's a JBG Smith garage and we're comfortable with parking there because of X, Y, and Z.
That's cool.
Yeah. I think that's well said.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. Definitely.
Back to what Les was saying, the pain points of budgets and everything. So that's actually mostly my fault. So I also established what our revenue budgets and what our pro forma budgets are for a new building. So that is mostly my fault. But we did go through a merger. Some of these buildings were planned well before we even knew each other existed, basically. From the Renato Charles E. Smith side, when we initially had it, I think we had gotten to a good point where we were very much friend of mine, even on lease negotiations, like lease terms will come across my desk before it got too far down the pipe, so that we can understand if it's even feasible to have a tenant that size that has this parking demand in the building. And I think a lot of people don't, neglect and don't realize that, ultimately, if you can't get people to your building, you can't have them as a tenant. And, it's a huge challenge, but
Yeah,
we've
it's
gotten,
definitely a domino effect.
yeah, we've gotten really good at figuring that part of it out. But we're a very young company. It's still a process as we learn through it. And I think the challenges internally actually are kind of going away as we all learn each other's roles and how systems work. And I think it's there's definitely a cohesive feel now that we can really present a great product to market each time, every time we put up a new building.
Especially because we have a lot of flexibility with being able to interact with a lot of different technology on the market. And
Well, I think your agenda is also your own as well, right? So
yeah, we kind of get to set our own our own sights on things if we can really prove that it's beneficial to the company overall and the customer experience. But I mean, we have different pain points that come along. Obviously, Neak's more overhead level of seeing financially and operationally, and the big picture idea, where I'm more implementing the small minor details on the ground.
They're never minor.
So we've definitely learned a lot. I can tell you I'm very well rehearsed now in EV charging stations, as we've implemented quite a few across our portfolio, and just learning coming into parking. And I have worked a little bit on web development, but not really heavily into network infrastructure. So that's been a big pain point of mine personally, is
just
learning all of the terminology and what everything. I mean, we'll go on job sites and I'm like, is that fiber? Is that Cat 5? Like, is that power? Like, I want to, so I can be able to recognize which is
That's
which.
cool.
Yeah.
I just told her to lick the tip. And just lick the end.
If I feel a little shocked, then we know what it is.
Then we know it's definitely not either one of those two.
So, just a little side thing here, like EV charging stations.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys see a time when you can charge for more for that space?
Yeah, actually, I had a pretty interesting conversation with ChargePoint a few weeks ago about that, and learning how to determine when that would maybe even be a dynamically priced item, and what we're charging per kilowatt and what the end user will be charging per kilowatt, and our payback on that equipment initially.
Because the people just camp out in those spaces most of the time.
Yeah, and
right?
that's a big part of what the parking industry overall and EV and mobility is, that there's no really true great way of doing enforcement that doesn't require boots on the ground.
You almost have to do it through the parks equipment somehow. So maybe scanning your monthly pass or whatever it is to be able to use that space.
Yeah, and there is some providers that do have where you can scan like a proxy card or even a key fob to activate it. And we could, for our residential properties, that's great. We could create it as a rentable item and manage it that way. But for the end user that may just be a daily parker that doesn't have a monthly key pass or whatever and has to pull a ticket at the gate to enter, that's where we kind of run into those struggles. But they usually do have to get a card through the provider that's typically the EV charger company. But we have been trying to be agnostic about it and try to test all of them to see which one we really like. And so that makes it hard too, because then it goes back to the whole thing. Well, man, I got to download another app, or I got to get another card, or I got to do this.
What if you could just scan the parking ticket to activate the session, and then it changed your rate all the way up until the time where you scanned it and turned it off and left the space or something?
Yeah.
No, you're thinking Lester.
Well, and right now, the cost that you can charge the end user per kilowatt is not there where we're charging for gas per gallon.
Sure.
So the payback on installing an EV charger, we're looking 10 to 20 years right now.
Really?
If we're going at the rate of kilowatt we're at now, because we're not charging $5 per kilowatt or we're charging 15 cents per kilowatt, and you only may need, depending on the vehicle, 10 kilowatts to get a full battery, or you know. So it's been interesting. But I mean, the EV companies have been very helpful and very informative. They've done surveys for us for no cost. And our biggest direction right now, especially with National Landing, is how do we kind of jump into this future proofing, and how do we have infrastructure in place that can sustain what's going to happen, and is EV really going to take off? And at what point do we
I
shift
think Elon
our
Musk says it's going to.
yeah. We're pretty
feels
well versed.
real.
And it is. We have seen the demand increase in real life, and
What about the infrastructure that's on site already, like all the electrical infrastructure? Because it was
we've
never.
had to add a lot of circuits. We've had to add, and it's funny because the EV industry is constantly fluctuating, and it's like last year everyone was pushing, let's do 80 amps, let's get away from 40 amps, and now the industry is actually kind of going back down to this 40 amp as being the level 2 charger, and then. Then you have.
So you're gonna have to explain that a little more.
Yeah. So basically, the first chargers that came out were maybe pushing like 40 amps to charge a vehicle. So it would take typically 6 to 8 hours to fully charge that battery at any time. And now, as we're trying to figure out how can we get people in and out of these stalls, how can we have them do a drop by at our retailers and just kind of get in and out of the space and free up to add more EV in, we need a faster charger. So that's where Tesla and other companies have now integrated the supercharging. So that's what we call the Mac Daddy. That is like 240 volts. So it's typically charges a full battery in about 20 minutes.
Really?
Yeah. So hopefully, and that's what we've had this big discussion, was like, how do we know in 5 years where EV is going to be? Are we going to be able to charge a car in 2 minutes like we can fill a gas tank? And what kind of infrastructure is that going to require?
And ultimately, like most of the power companies have only X amount of power going to a region.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah.
So for us, since we own regions, we have to go back and speak to the providers and say, hey, look, we have to get way more power pumped through here because of the new EV demands. For them, there's a massive infrastructure cost. There's, it's there's a full statewide and
we just
citywide problem.
We just got educated on the amount of heat they put off, and really having the infrastructure of how do we get the heat out of the garages.
Yeah, you're not kidding. I mean, a battery charger and a battery, especially when it's being charged that quickly, will produce lots of heat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's almost a limiting factor in how quickly you can charge the battery.
Yeah.
And where we can locate the EV chargers.
Yeah.
So now we're looking at, initially
put them on the roof.
Well, initially we really were trying to push around like central points of access to the building, because we do have like a very visual perspective to it in regards to paint and aesthetics. But now it's like we need to put it close to the ramp, or we need to put it close to all of the exhaust fans.
So what are the thoughts around like adding like solar to the building to be able to generate some of your own power and offset some of that?
Some of the EV chargers have that feature built in already, and they are working with that. It's just we're dealing with some buildings that we've held for 40 years and they're older and it's just not there.
Yeah.
And we don't really have a whole lot of surface lot parking. So
you can't put the shades up or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's been our biggest struggle is, and a lot of these EV companies want, that foot traffic attention, and they want to be able to have someone just pull in right off the street into their spot, and we don't really have a lot of that to offer because we don't have a lot of service parking. We have a lot of underground parking. So it's like, how can we educate these companies that we're getting just as much traffic in our garages as they're getting on a street, and enforcing this whole like you're gonna be paying to park in the garage and you're gonna be paying to charge.
And a little more to charge, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, we do make the argument that we don't get free gas when we come to work. So
I wish we did.
I've seen that too. Like for employees, even employee parking. I mean, that's kind of becoming an issue now, right? You got a bunch of employees showing up in electric vehicles, all expecting there to run an extension cord outside, let them charge, and
we have run into a lot of people who complain about not having a lot of electric chargers in our garage, or often because their employees stay in those stalls. So it's managing within their own team.
Yep.
And we're trying to figure out supply and demand, and like how many do we really put in, because we have buildings we put in 16 to 20 per our lead credentials, and they've never been used, and we have other buildings that want the 6 that are being used are constantly being charging 5 cars a day. And how do we determine which place gets more chargers overall? But I don't know. It's a lot. It's definitely, I've, like I said, been well rehearsed in it, and I think that when I talk to the companies, they're a little surprised because really dug
very. Not everyone knows as much about it.
Yeah.
I think the other challenge is, is as the industry kind of shifts to being more urban, especially in the real estate world where everything's becoming more urban, we're going to lose surface parking. And the majority of people that buy electric vehicles are going to be urban dwellers who cannot charge at home because there's not a charging station in their apartment building. So now they're relying on charging stations at work, which isn't necessarily the right solution. So luckily, we also build apartment buildings. So as we build apartment buildings, we're considering more charging stations that kind of take the load off of the work amount. But also, most EV users, what was the statistic? They never get past a quarter, in usage of the battery before they charge. It's not like a regular, combustible engine where everyone that drives a regular car is like, okay, I get down to a quarter tank, I'll go fill up.
Well,
I'm freaked out by it because you're going to get stranded somewhere.
Well, and that's there's not a lot of infrastructure on major highways that can help supply that. But even the EV chargers now know what your battery limit's at. So the first 20% of the battery and the last 20% of the battery charge very slow.
Okay.
And then you get this kind of fast charge in between. So it's very interesting in regards to the batteries that they're putting into these vehicles and how they're interacting with the chargers themselves.
Yeah, because I think that was one of the issues too. I mean, even if you could put in 30 chargers, you really need that to be almost like its own smart grid to manage where it was putting power on where the need was.
Yeah, and even to just pull the 80 amps, I mean, we saw almost triple in cost in regards to infrastructure. So when you talk about 240 amps, I mean, it's
you gotta have thicker wires.
I don't know, longer runs, and I mean, we try to get as close to our electrical rooms as we can to make it more cost efficient, but we're not really turning a huge revenue on it. Like I said, our payback analysis is showing 10 to 20 just on the hardware, not even what we're paying in electricity.
Wow.
Yeah, ultimately it's we're running out of circuits. I mean, we can only add so much to the grid before we run out. So the overall infrastructure is just not quite there yet for the region to handle the amount of electric cars that are supposedly coming on board, and I do believe that it is going to be a massive bump up in it. I always believed in electric vehicles, but ultimately there's a bigger conversation that needs to happen with municipalities, with power companies to make this work.
Well, it's just really interesting, especially Neak and I in our division, and our division really isn't universal across the real estate industry. We're kind of a new little segment and division. But the people that we interact with that are in these higher up positions just seems like they're almost 5 years behind. And it's like, how do we get this mentality of thinking 5 years ahead when we're implementing this stuff instead of catching up to where the industry is now?
Always responding to demands instead of leading.
Yes, exactly.
So what's an area where you guys feel like you're ahead and where you're leading in, and something you're planning for that maybe not everyone else is thinking about?
Well, I think, getting to a centralized command for a real estate company and kind of understanding how to, I'd always hate to say this, but how to operate your own garages and almost operate in-house, even with operators in place, and understanding, revenue and budgeting standpoints and what you should be making. I think we've really gotten ahead on that. I think the aesthetics of our garages, definitely the look and feel, the lighting. We have music in our garages. We've put certain guidance systems in. I think we've, really making strides, especially since Ashley joined us, where we've really made it look like a totally different beast now. People come in and they actually get excited about our garages. They think it's crazy that there's, music blaring through and the colors are bright and the lighting's great, and I think people really love that portion of it. From the revenue and just the regular standpoints of the regular budgeting and operations, I think we've made massive strides where, I think operators have, can get a little better at that. And for me, it's always a little bit challenging when I have to speak to some of our operators and understand where they're coming from a budgeting or a cost standpoint. We operate at 8% of our gross revenue, and I don't think there's anybody else out there in the market that can hit that number, that even come close to that number.
So explain that a little bit better.
So our operating cost is just 8% of our gross. So say if we make $1 million, it's almost nothing to operate our garage.
Wow.
And that's not like letting standards slip. And that's really that's the challenge for most people. Is if you're going to operate it that cheap, you're going to have really a garbage product. For us, our product is, I'd like to
premium
think
product.
Is a very premium product. Yet we can maintain our operating costs at such a low percentage of what we pull in for revenue. That it's
Is there any thoughts on offering that up to other real estate management companies?
Oh, we actually, we speak to a lot of real estate management companies. We, we kind of are, we give our input. We give a little bit of advice and almost free consultation sometimes, and help them kind of make strides to what can they do better.
But we still try to keep our secret sauce.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say that we've really kind of revolutionized is what Neak touched on, was having a standard. And this is a big issue we've run across with operators, is that there's not this kind of black book or rules of how to really make something look.
It's like a branding manual for JBG Smith.
Yeah, exactly.
Garages.
And I've even talked about, like, to other operator owners, and have even spoken about, like, just knowing who's on the property, right? Like, if our CEO walks on the property, that parking attendant should know exactly who they are.
Absolutely.
And there shouldn't be any issues, and that could separate them as a company from other operators, to have that really first touch experience. And I think another thing that we've really honed in on as a real estate company is, how do we integrate parking into other parts of the real estate industry as it's growing, right? So you have software like Yardi that's really consuming the residential and commercial marketplace in regards to their account management.
So what's Yardi?
So Yardi is it's an account management platform. You can use it to hold pretty much all of your.
It's basically our accounting system.
Yeah,
okay.
But it holds all of our leases. On the residential side, it holds all of the renters' information in regards to the renter's insurance, their vehicle information,
Nice.
Their ledger, obviously, their contact information, emergency contacts, everything like that. It's kind of like a one-point touch. And they can also link that all the way back to where the first conversation started. How did they find us? Who toured them on this property? Who toured them on this commercial space?
Okay.
What was the broker? And kind of just, what's our touch at first, all the way from first to last? How do we transition to this relationship? And parking really doesn't have that. We've worked on an antiquated software for a really long time. It's like, how does parking get thought about at the same level as everything else in the real estate industry? And how can we manage, how parking is paid for, or vehicle information is entered all the way into our lease agreements that are being signed and negotiated?
That's cool. Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah.
You guys are definitely doing awesome stuff. I mean, if you go into any of your facilities, it's always there's always a look and feel and a standard that it's very obvious.
Yeah, I mean, we're slowly going one by one. Our standards are like, okay, we want to be able to be comfortable to enter in our garage and not have to turn on your headlights. And, as your eyes adjust from outside sun into our garage, you're not having this huge, where your eyes almost go black because you can't, the shift in light was so fast.
Mm-hmm.
And, having a 2-second response from our intercom to our PSC.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so that people can really get real-time service and learning how to use our systems and getting people acclimated, because they may not be a monthly parker. They may be a daily parker that comes once a year, but they may continue to park in our garage because they're comfortable with what they experience.
Yeah, I mean, we work very hard to try to staff our control center with bilingual employees also. I mean, the little things that most of our operators and our competitors don't even think about. That's not something that comes to mind. We use digital rate boards that Ashley's actually implemented across our portfolio. It's a slow process.
So easy to update, though. You're not.
It's a massive cost savings, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people would think that it's, oh my gosh, you're paying for these giant screens. It's super expensive. But ultimately, if we're changing rates consistently every year, it's much cheaper than doing that. Although we don't change rates that often. And we have learned a lot as we implement what can sustain us long term, right? So even choosing what colors are we putting, are they going to date quickly?
Yeah.
Can we reduce overhead signage and use epoxy paint because it lasts longer. We don't, people aren't ripping vinyl banners off the columns of their cars and hitting clearance bars. And what kind of material are we putting in for those clearance bars? Can it sustain being hit several times?
Or sit in the sun.
Or sit in the sun, yeah. And same thing with the equipment. Like we've even talked about when we have service slots with outdoor equipment, there's really no true, really nice aesthetic canopy that can cover it from rain, and can it function outside? And as we do rate boards, we have to factor in like outdoor rated TVs and what's the longevity on that. And I don't know. I mean,
it's a lot to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have like 20 little projects within one project. And even, we go all the way from the ceiling to the carpet on the floor.
It kind of sounds like it doesn't end too, right? This is a continuous process where you're just going to keep making it better.
Yeah.
And keep adjusting as things change and trying to look forward as far as you can.
Mm-hmm. And,
that's cool.
and communicating and educating as we go along.
Trying to maybe one day you'll have like a list of options that leasing agents can give away and can't give away.
Hey, that would be great. We should implement that now.
Well, for the leasing agents, we're actually pretty close to that.
Yeah,
that's good. For the most part,
yeah.
Like we, I think we forget sometimes because we get so deep in the weeds. Is, Ashley and I have this opportunity. We work as like this team to kind of control this little, to control a region, and we're
some of the lease agreements I've seen about the free parking that's been given to a client, like every fourth Thursday, if it's raining and it's, after summer solstice, then you get free parking.
Oh, I won't call out some. I mean, in a different life, I saw a lease agreement that had over 10 rate adjustments within a year, and I was like, how do you track this? How do you do this? And ultimately, it affects the region, and it started to really take down this neighborhood. And people don't realize, like parking can take you down as a real estate company pretty quickly if you do it wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I was just going to piggyback on that we run into that issue too in regards to the equipment that we put in and where we move it and where we place it. And is that going to affect traffic throughout the city?
Yeah.
Because if people are backed up in our garages, and they're having, they're feeding that onto the roads, and that just causes, it's just like I said, a domino effect earlier. So it's like even these small little things that we do can affect a region substantially.
Absolutely. Especially when you get into the bigger, the more urban areas too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, for Crystal City alone, and I've been blamed for traffic jams. I swear to God, it wasn't me. But, it's, you have 64 lanes. You have, 15,000 people all showing up at the same time
trying to leave,
and everyone's trying to leave at the same time. That traffic can, a couple mishaps in the system can back up traffic throughout the region pretty fast, especially when we're pretty close to the highways.
When you're feeding out the traffic lights too, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's even like getting our architects to be on that forefront too. It's, why would you put an entry exit on a main highway or right at the entry point of a stoplight, because no one's going to be able to get out.
Like right at the stoplight.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, thinking about these pain points, and what we've come across a lot too is putting a loading dock right next to a parking garage entrance has also caused a nightmare, because you have giant trucks trying to pull in and out, and they're blocking the entrance and exits.
I've seen that so many times. The loading dock's always right next to the entrance to the parking.
They find it, and I understand from the design standpoint it's just easy, but ultimately, like, it's,
operationally, it doesn't.
It's probably less expensive too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they always, operationally, it looks easy until they realize what time the trucks show up.
Mm-hmm.
And they always show up at the same time your morning rush comes in. So it's,
Dock masters are a real thing.
Yeah.
Managing that is a beast sometimes.
I feel for those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Well, listen, thank you both for your time. This has been great. I didn't know we were going to talk about EV charging stations, but that was some good stuff.
Yeah.
That was good. Any last things, or you feel good about it? Yeah.
I always feel good about things. But it's thank you very much, Lester, for having us on.
Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Really hope you are enjoying yourself. Please comment, share, subscribe, tell your friends, tell everyone you know. Thanks.